right, and we're back. Welcome to the 20th edition of the eDuck podcast. I am Robby Boydstun here in Portland, and I am basically face chatting. We're doing a recording with Erik, who is in Eugene right now. Erik, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. This is interesting. Yeah, we're doing a Gmail Hangout video chat right now. So this is a different, again, yet a third format of how we're doing our podcast. We'll see how the audio shows up here, but I think this is going to be kind of the plan moving forward. Outside of game days, to do, if this works out, to do them via essentially Skype like this on Wednesdays. So for kind of a preview / recruiting update, who will be there, we'll do that on Wednesday. We'll get into greater detail. We'll do another one this Wednesday, getting greater detail of all the recruits who are going to be there for the Cal game on Saturday, and then Saturday do a post-game report. But today, we're in the midst of the bye week here, so we're kind of doing kind of a weird in-between podcast, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of recruiting, and then we'll probably talk a little bit about practice and kind of go forward from there, and we'll give you probably more of a preview, like you said, next week. But there was really no shortage of recruiting news this week, so it was kind of nice to see for those who are looking out for a lot of Oregon news this week or stuff related to it. You're going to find probably more of it from the recruiting standpoint. So let's just dive right into that. Last night, got a chance to actually both Erik and I both got a chance to go to some high school football games. Erik, you said you were out in Springfield.
I was, yes. I was doing some RG work covering Springfield and Eagle Point. So I think your game might have been a little higher quality of competition, but still pretty fun watching high school football. It doesn't get much better than that on a Friday night.
Oh, no. And yeah, last night, you being out in Springfield, I was out in Portland watching Jesuit Central Catholic. Obviously, a couple of big state powerhouses there at the 6A level. Was out there with Brandon Huffman, and really kind of a really fun night to watch some football, because about the second half of that game, it really just busted open offensively. They went into halftime both 10-10. And obviously, you've got Division I talent on both sides there. With Central Catholic, you have Cam Scarlett, Connor Humphreys, who's a 2014 kid, U.S. Army All-American, and then on the other side, you have Sanford verbal commit and former Oregon target Joey Alfieri, and also his teammate, who Oregon is still going after, defensive end / tight end Henry Mondu, and Central Catholic ended up taking the game 45-31 last night, jumped out to a big lead in the second half behind Scarlett, scoring 3 consecutive touchdowns, which then Alfieri matched, which was kind of fun to see them go back and forth from the rushing standpoint. But really, after the game, it was about talking to Mondu to see what he was doing recruiting-wise, because we haven't been able to get updates with him. And he did inform me that he will be visiting Oregon for the Cal game next week. It will be an official visit, so that's pretty big news for Oregon fans that are hoping to land a big one of the last big in-state prospects in what has kind of been a down year talent-wise for Oregon. But you got to see a little bit of the future last night. Cam Scarlett is going to be a kid to keep your eye out on. He's definitely a big guy. That's going to be a big name in the state next year.
Younger brother of Brennan, correct? The California Golden Bear, is that right?
Actually, Brandon and I were having this discussion last night because we couldn't pinpoint whether they were brothers or like cousins, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him after the game, so I don't want to throw it out there that a misrepresentation of that. But we were kind of having a fun little debate on what their relationship was, because the Cal site was retweeting Brandon out there with updates on Cam because of the relationship.
Sure. Now, what was Huffman's takeaway? What was Huff's takeaway on all the talent? I mean, you talked about it. It sounds like 5 or 6 major Division I players. That's kind of a rarity for Oregon high school football to have that many big-time, Pac-12 level recruits in one game. What did Brandon come away with? Do you remember? Yeah,
Brandon actually said that he gave Joey Alfieri his highest compliment he could give him, which was Joey Alfieri, football player. So Alfieri did come off very well last night, especially in the backfield. He was doing a very good job in the pursuing game defensively. Central Catholic was able to use their running game in a variety of ways. The passing attack wasn't really doing it for him, but with Cam Scarlett and Ryan Nall, who Nall was fantastic as well. It's just Scarlett kind of got a little bit more attention towards the end of the game because he was racking up touchdowns. But it was it was basically the Alfieri show for Jesuit and Mondu. A little bit of a rough game last night. He was able to come up with a couple tackles, but again, Central Catholic was able to spread out the field and keep Jesuit on their toes for a lot of the game. So it was a bit of a rough night for them. It'd be interesting to go back later in the year because these are two teams that could face off in the playoffs here in a few months. And so it'll be interesting to see how a few more weeks of growth for Jesuit and with Central being the top team in the state still and staying undefeated, it'll be interesting if these two collide again later on in the year because I don't think Jesuit's going to forget losing on their own home field in front of actually what was a pretty raucous Central Catholic crowd as well. They filled up about half the stadium, so I'm sure that didn't sit well with them.
So what was the feeling? I know you have a video up on eDuck. You guys should go check it out. But Mondu noticeably disappointed. But you get the feeling here with his recruitment that it's kind of an Oregon, Washington, and it sounded like he wants to visit one of those Florida schools. Kind of wants to maybe get away for kind of a cool free trip. But you get the feeling it kind of comes down to those two Northwest schools for him.
Yeah, I do, and it's because those were the only two that he set up for officials right now. The Washington game might even come. He told Brandon he might even come at when they play Oregon up there in a few weeks. So he might get a double dose of Oregon. And on top of that, I did overhear that he did say he wanted to visit Florida and Miami, and I overheard later that I don't think he has an offer from Florida, but he's going out there to check it out. I think he really just wants to go see a nice weather school is basically what he made out with.
You can't blame a kid from coming from Oregon wanting to go to Florida for a couple of days.
No, you can't, especially at this time of year when it's about to get pretty bad. You want to take those nice trips, the Southern California and the I guess Texas and Florida, those types of trips. So you can't blame him for doing it. But right now, I do think it comes down to a Northwest battle. And it'll be fun to see. I mean, he did say that he doesn't know in terms of decision-wise what he wants to do. He said it's kind of going to be like when he knows, which is becoming a quite frequently used refrain from a lot of the recruits right now. Yeah. So, but definitely considering that Mondu is an in-state kid, he's definitely a target that people are interested in. If you heard the roars for Thomas Tyner getting a 1-yard gain last week in Tennessee, you know how much Oregon loves their in-state recruits. So,
well, let's talk about that a little bit. You said the Scout 300 came out earlier this week, and not a whole lot of love for the in-state kids. I think you said Alfieri was the only one in the top 300, if I'm not mistaken.
And he was sitting at 296.
So barely making it in. So kind of a down year for the in-state kids, I guess, in the state of Oregon. But there's still, like you said, 4 or 5 guys that Oregon had offers out to, or 3 or 4, I think, that Oregon had offers out to.
Yeah, and there's a couple verbal commits already on there. Now, of course, the Scout 300 covers 2014 and 2015. So you're getting a nice mix of talent that will be going out this year and then some talent that is up and coming right now and already making some waves. So Royce Freeman and Arian Springs both find themselves on the list. Freeman at 91, Springs at 163. So that's encouraging for some Duck fans. But the kids they have offers to or showing interest in, Adoree Jackson sitting at number 6, John Juju Smith sitting there at number 7, and also Smith broke this week that he's planning on visiting Oregon sometime in the future, dropped an Ole Miss visit to come out, and he's going to come out and visit Oregon. Obviously, he was turning a few heads at the opening, so he's definitely a top West Coast prospect, especially at that wide receiver position. Joe Mixon, the top running back for the 2014 class, he sits at 27. Linebacker Clifton Garrett out of the Midwest at 40. Micaiah Quick, who, as of right now, according to Greg Biggins, who's done a fantastic job keeping up with updates on Quick, it sounds like he's going to be visiting next weekend. He was, of course, rumored to be visiting at the Tennessee game. Keep everything with a grain of salt right now. Things seem to change a lot with Quick, but it sounds like he's taking an ACT and then coming out to Oregon next week to watch them play Cal. And then we got Buda Baker sitting at 64 on the list, He's yet to take an official visit to Oregon, but is planning on it. Jaylen Brown, who was out there last week, sits at 75, lanky wide receiver out of Arizona. And then again, yeah, Alfieri, the only Oregon kid on the list, sitting there 4 spots from the bottom. So you can definitely tell that Oregon's just the profile for Oregon is not very high for 2014, and nor will it be for 2015 either.
So you touched on Quick visiting for Cal, and we say visiting maybe by Wednesday when we do our official list of official visitors, if you will, for the Cal game. Quick might not be on that list because there's been so much up and down with him, but along with Mondu and Quick, there's a third visitor, Tony James, the running back out of Florida. Is it?
Yep, he's out of Florida. Speedy running back who thinks that, according to the report by Amy Campbell, I believe, said that he likes the way Oregon's offense flows and that he could be a big factor in it. Definitely a guy who relies on his speed. So he's another guy that you throw in there when you're looking at Oregon still going after a Joe Mixon. And now you got a Tony James who's out of SEC country out there in Florida, being able to bring him out to the West Coast to check out Oregon. You wonder, what Oregon's options are going to be going forward. It seems like they're doing a pretty good job of setting up, I guess, backup plans or just, I guess, other options if they're looking to fill a second running back spot there in case Mixon doesn't come, or maybe even if Mixon did, James is at least that other option to come in and be a buffer for it.
So any news on, obviously the coaches, this is part of the reason we did a recruiting update, is that with the exception of Coach Helfrich, almost every single assistant coach is out on the recruiting trail right now, so we thought we'd kind of follow suit and do a recruiting update to lead in, because that's kind of the big storyline, I think, for what Oregon is doing this week. Obviously, we talked about 3 bye-week practices, which we'll kind of get into in a couple minutes here, but any other news from the road that came across to you in terms of who they were checking out, perhaps?
Well, I do know that due to a tweet earlier this week, I know that Morgan Mahalik said Coach Aliotti came by his school to just kind of check in on things. I actually talked to Morgan Mahalik earlier this week about just his early season success, getting used to being a starter, taking over for Jared Goff, who's now at Cal, and making a little bit of a name for himself already. With the passing numbers he's putting up. And so talk to him a little bit about that, how he kind of models his game a lot after Marcus Mariota, but also that influence from Goff after having played behind him and kind of getting to learn from him. And it was interesting because he did say that he thought he was a better runner than Goff, so that's why he thought he'd be better at the Oregon system, but that he really respects Goff and does take certain parts of his game and to study, but that he really is more of a quarterback that's similar to Marcus Mariota and how he runs that offense. And him watching these Duck games and being able to dissect what they've been able to do early on. He even said, I think the quote was that he said, I don't think anyone didn't expect them to be this successful, but he said that the rate at which they're doing this is what's surprising to me. He said they look better than they did last year. There's no hangover from Kelly leaving. And that's a big positive for him looking forward to coming up here next year. It sounds like he's completely solid right now, really just focusing on the season, trying to get to 4-0. I didn't get the chance to see his score from last night to see if they did go to 4-0, but he had a pretty strong game last week, throwing for 269 yards and 3 touchdowns in a big win. So he's definitely progressing in terms of getting his feet wet, getting comfortable in that starting role, which is something they're definitely going to need, especially since he made such a big noise in the offseason for having never started a game by making Elite 11 and obviously the Oregon verbal commitment.
Well, and I know Mahalik is an Oregon commitment. He's obviously going to be pro-Duck, but it's interesting hearing that from a recruit that the perception right now is that there hasn't been much of a drop-off from Kelly to Helfrich. I think that bodes well, not just with this recruiting class, but going forward that I think there was some concern. We saw Dontre Wilson bolt. I think that was more to feeling betrayed, but probably also in part to being concerned about going from Kelly to Helfrich at the University of Oregon after Kelly had obviously had those 4 really, really solid years. So to hear from a recruit that he doesn't think there's been much drop-off, I think that's a good thing going forward, and that's something that that's a perception you probably would want to have with recruits at this point in the game, with Helfrich just finishing up his third game as an Oregon coach.
Right, and that's what, and you're seeing them get more of these visitors coming in from across the country, which is really showing that these 3 games have spoken volumes to the recruits that are watching. I know I talked to Vincent Jackson. Vincent Jackson is coming up for the UCLA game, and he's been tweeting about Oregon. Last week he was tweeting nonstop about Oregon during the game. You can tell he's a kid who's excited to check out the school and see what they're all about. So they're really still reaching that national brand status around the country. And with that drop off, without that drop off, like you touched on, you're going to prevent those Dontre Wilson incidents from happening, because there likely won't be a huge coaching change this year unless something extremely odd happens. You never know, but
Texas might have a job available.
Texas might have a job available. Depending on USC, maybe Nebraska if they tank. Who knows? So,
shut up here.
It's a long season, but again, that coaching stability really does, and increased performance really has spoken volumes so far, and you're seeing that. And that actually kind of does lead into a little bit of talking about kids who've already seen that progress from last week. John Plattenberg, Jaylen Brown, Jalen Johnson coming out to visit. We didn't get a chance to touch on this on the last podcast, but I got to talk to Plattenberg. Greg Biggins talked to Jaylen Brown. Both raved about their Oregon trips. Plattenberg, it seems, he said the picture was a little bit clearer, but he doesn't sound like he's right on the cusp of committing. But he did say, kind of when that gut feeling hits, and he's just going to plan on taking his visits. I know that, he had Oregon. He's visiting Texas this weekend. And after that, he said he might actually just take a week off from recruiting, kind of just focus on his team, go over a few things, and then possibly a decision could come. But again, that could be at the end of the season or in January. Really, it's kind of just when he knows, he knows. But it did sound great for Oregon fans that are looking at Plattenberg as another strong option in the cornerback game. Obviously, Plattenberg, a Texas prospect they're looking at, and also Nick Watkins. There was a brief update this week on him, who we've talked about a little bit in the past. He's also still on the radar for Oregon. So they're really going heavy after those Texas defensive backs, and Arian Springs. Plattenberg did admit that Springs was still pushing on him pretty hard to get to Oregon, so you've got that nudge there. I know Mihalik's still pushing on some other kids to go to Oregon, so they're really using the verbal commits already to really push that message of going to Oregon, which is a positive sign again for Oregon fans who are looking for it. So definitely keep an eye on Plattenberg. Jaylen Brown visited, got a chance to hang out with Devin Allen a little bit. Even though his host was Kenai Benoit, but he did get a chance to visit with his, state mate, Devin Allen, who's also from Arizona and also a wide receiver. So he said he liked the fact that he could get that familiarity while he was there, had a successful visit. So going forward with him, obviously, is going to be something to keep an eye on. And then Jalen Johnson, sounds like he had a good trip, according to Biggins, but then ultimately just decided he wanted to go to Boise State, which, given the way that program's put together and how that program's run by Chris Peterson, can't exactly blame him. I know to a lot of people it's not going to make a ton of sense because, Oregon and Boise State are in 2 different places right now, but at the same time, it's kind of more of a comfortability thing. And, when you're comfortable at one place and you can't really explain it, I understand why a kid would want to go to a smaller school that would probably give him a bigger chance to shine right away, as opposed to kind of fighting it out at Oregon and maybe finding some difficulty seeing some playing time early on or having to battle that kind of competition. So good for him to find his school and going forward, Oregon shouldn't have a shortage of people to come in and take a look at in order to fill some of those spots.
We'll move on to kind of some practice stuff, and kind of one of the big things I think is that Helf is doing his bye weeks a little differently than Chip Kelly. We'll touch on that in a second and kind of what the differences have been. If you've read eDuck and my practice reports, you kind of already know, but if you haven't, I'll kind of break down, I guess, what we've seen from Helfrich and how he's kind of differed from Chip in this bye week. Obviously, his first bye week as head coach. But I wanted to kind of come back and kind of regroup and talk about the defensive backs that Oregon is recruiting, because it's been kind of an odd process, because it seemed like a couple of months ago they had it kind of narrowed down to about 3 kids in McGraw, Baker, and Springs that they were going to take, and now it seems like we're adding Plattenberg. It sounds like Watkins is another guy they're looking at. Do you think they're going to take more guys than maybe we thought? Earlier this summer.
Well, early on, Metro McGraw even said that even if they had 3 or 4 defensive backs, when he took his unofficial in the spring, they were talking about where he would fit in, even if they had a bevy of those types of players. And they still said they would make room for him. I think there is room for 3 to even 5 if they wanted to take it. I don't know if they would, but defensive backs to come in, kind of get their feet wet, and they would be able to load up on what is becoming a very talented cornerback class for in 2014. It's one of the groups that definitely shows a lot of talent. McGraw is going to have his visit. He told me last week he's going to have his visit on December 13th, so he's going to do it after the season. But in talking to him, and unfortunately, John Curtis Christian lost their first game last night, so they're that puts a little ding in their state title run. But McGraw's even been saying that teams are recognizing this kind of talent because they're not even throwing towards him. He said, I think as of last week, he'd had 2 balls thrown his way all season, and through 2-3 games, and that really the people who are benefiting are the guys on the other side of the field, the juniors and seniors over there on the other side that are still ending up making those plays that McGraw would be making, because you just see the depth of talent in the defensive back position, both for 2014 and 2015 should be pretty good as well. So again, I think Oregon's just taking advantage of a good crop of kids heading forward, and I don't expect them to do any different next year. With in talking with Brandon, a defensive line is supposed to be a highly touted position that should have a lot of talent in terms of depth. Quarterback should as well. So I'd expect Oregon to go in and attack those spots where they're going to be able to get the most amount of talent across a wide range.
Sounds good. And one, I guess, kind of recruiting note, and before we jump into kind of some practice stuff, but having had a chance yesterday to go watch Springfield High School play, first off, their team is really, really good. They beat Eagle Point 48-0, and a lot of that has to do with their sophomore quarterback, Trevor Watson, who I'm not sure he's an Oregon-level guy, but he's probably a D1 level prospect. And if you're in the Eugene area and you get a chance to go watch the Millers play, I know this sounds kind of funny because they've been kind of so mediocre for so long, but this Watson guy, along with their head coach, have kind of turned things around here the last 2 years. Watson also was the starting quarterback last year as a freshman, and now has an 11-4 record, which is pretty unprecedented for a quarterback at Springfield. He's really fun to watch. He's a little undersized, 5'11", about 185 pounds, but extremely fast and dangerous in the open field. They kind of run similar offenses to what Oregon runs, which is not all that surprising with kind of the influence that Oregon probably has in local high school football. But if you get a chance, go watch him play. He's probably a name to kind of have on the radar, at least for 2017. Obviously, it's really early to start looking at that, but I think the coach talked about the post game. He thinks that Watson could be a Division I level guy.
Did you get a chance to kind of get a sense of his throwing motion and like, does he have a pretty quick release? I mean, I don't know in terms of offenses in Oregon high school football. There's a lot more running than there is passing, but did you get to catch a little bit of him trying to do that?
Well, he only threw 7 passes all game because they scored pretty much every time he touched the football. But I don't think he projects as a quarterback as much as he might project as like a wide receiver, like a slot receiver type of guy, or maybe even a defensive back. But he was pretty accurate, 6 for 7 for 100. I think it was 25 yards and a score. First play of game was a 65-yard touchdown pass where he showed pretty nice touch on the ball. So I don't know if he projects as much as a passer as he just projects as an athlete going forward.
Gotcha. All right, well, let's dive into those practice reports. I've been keeping track. They had 3 bye week practices. Am I correct there?
That's
Eric?
right, which is in itself, I think, a somewhat of a change up from what Chip had done. There's a little bit more rest time this week than there had been when Chip was here. When Chip was here, I think they did run 4 practices, which is kind of the norm for them. So they ran Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we mentioned that Helfrich was really the lone coach, kind of the lone wolf, keeping track of keeping track of the den there for the guys, because all of the assistants were essentially out on visits, recruiting, out recruiting. So I think what Helfrich is doing that's a little bit different than what Kelly was doing is there seems to be a much greater onus placed upon improving the young guys and getting them a lot of snaps. I mean, it sounds like, for the most, during game prep week, the 2s and 3s are part of the scout team, and they're playing, for instance, they'll be preparing and showing what California would do so that the starters can get a feel for how California is going to play. So this was an opportunity this past week to get a lot more team reps, a lot more Oregon reps for some of the younger guys, which is only going to pay dividends going forward. I think Chip maybe used it more as an improvement week for the whole team, especially the starters and guys who are going to play big snaps anyway, whereas Helfrich decided to say, hey, let's focus on getting these younger guys a lot more snaps than they probably usually get.
And I mean, that's got to be huge going forward, considering that, and I saw that the quote in the story that he said, you can tell who's been studying their Oregon playbook. But again, do you think it's going to be a little different given the fact that they're going to prepare for a team that's completely revamped their offense and is playing with a little bit more, even though it hasn't translated to wins, they're playing with more confidence than I've seen them play with in the last few years?
Well, I think one of the keys and one of the reasons they did it the way they did it, according to Helfrich, is that they wanted to maintain that normal game prep week, because Helfrich said these guys are so used to the routine, and he didn't want to break that routine. They kind of have Monday we're going to go do this, Tuesday this, Wednesday this, Thursday that. And so I think Helfrich was hesitant to start doing game prep and game planning during the bye week, maybe throwing off a little of the rhythm that they've had that has led to such success so far. And so they they elected to the coaches are obviously familiar with what Cal's done. Helfrich said all of the video had been watched, all the film was watched, most of the game plan had kind of been put together. It's just a process of going about kind of doing the same things that they're used to doing in terms of preparing during the actual week with the players.
Now, how did the situation with Colt Lyerla, did that play any factor? Were they just trying to sweep that under the rug, or was that something that was addressed in practice as something that the team went over, or was it kind of just a Helfrich Lyerla thing?
That's a good question. I know obviously Helfrich and Lyerla met. That was touched upon on Tuesday, which is the first practice of the week for the Ducks. It sounds like obviously we can kind of backtrack here, because the last time we did a podcast, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, and I don't want to talk too much about this, but there were questions a little bit about what circumstances met after Saturday's game. Obviously, Colt was not present, or even he was not at the game versus Tennessee, didn't play. Johnny Mundt had the stand-up game, while Lyerla was essentially at home on his couch. So that kind of led people to question what was going on with Colt, and circumstances didn't really lend any light to it. And I think really what it comes down to, the whole confusion there obviously led to Colt talking to someone from the media, saying some things he probably shouldn't have said, that Helfrich says he probably shouldn't have said. I think really the problem starts with Helfrich and the verbiage. This is, if this is Chip Kelly saying, he's day-to-day, or we don't talk about injuries, everybody goes, oh, okay, he's injured, that's why he wasn't there. But you say circumstances, which a new coach 3 games in hasn't really developed his verbiage very well. A lot of the people were kind of going, oh boy, what does circumstances mean? And that's what led to the whole thing. But it really does sound like it's kind of water under the bridge. As for your first question regarding whether or not they talked about it with the team, I don't know the answer to that. That wasn't something that was really addressed.
Okay, yeah, so no players were talking about it after practice or anything like that.
No, and I don't think anybody was really asked too much about it. Actually, I do think Marcus was asked about it and said, hey, that's between the two of them, so maybe that's an answer.
Now, with that being said, sticking with the tight ends, obviously Mundt coming up with a big week and winning the Mackey Tight End of the Week award, but then also a guy who's now been lost in the shuffle thanks to last week, Pharaoh Brown, made his return to the team. And so talk a little bit about that and just kind of what that impact has on that now what's looking like a very deep tight end position.
Well, it's going to be kind of an interesting. It's going to be a tale of, I guess, 2 weekends here, because last Saturday you kind of were like, boy, they only have one. Well, I don't want to say one quality tight end, but Munt obviously proved himself to be, and then after that we're looking at Koa Kai and Evan Bayless, who are both heavily recruited athletes, but guys who haven't had a lot of snaps at tight end. Of course, Munt hasn't had that many either, but really just looks like quite the player just right off the bat. But now with Brown back and Lyerla back, this is going to be perhaps one of the deepest units on the team, because I think Brown, having spoken with Osborne and even Helfrich early on in fall camp, he was really one of the star players, one of the breakout guys, and he was a guy that they were really, really high on, really excited about, and thought that could perhaps even push Lyerla for snaps. So to have him back in the fold, I think a lot of people want to make it, this is going to be a Lyerla and Munt tight end position. I think Brown has a chance possibly to kind of push those guys and maybe kind of make it a three-man tight end battle, which only draws potential for some really exciting formations, kind of almost like what Stanford did with Harbaugh and even Shaw to a certain extent, where you line up three big, strong guys who are good pass catchers out on the field at once. I think Brown and Lyerla are guys who can both kind of come out wide. Munt's maybe more of a guy who stays in on the line of scrimmage, but you get those three guys in the field, and man, that's just added weapons for Marcus.
Well, and you also wonder, you've seen that special package used with Lyerla in the backfield now that they have a couple of tight ends that they know they can insert into the game and play to a high level, whether or not that opens up a few options for that package when, it's very rarely used, but in those special situations to get that added size in the game to maybe pick up like on a key 4th and 3 or a goal line situation, how that might play out now.
Yeah, I'd contend that Lyerla as kind of that bulldozer Toby Gerhart running back has been kind of underutilized since last year. There haven't been a whole lot of crucial 4th downs or goal line stands this year because Oregon, frankly, hasn't really needed to pick up a 4th down that would change a game or score a touchdown that would change a game. But I think going forward, if you can put Brown and Munt out there on the edge and then line up Lyerla in the backfield either as a fullback or as a tailback and just let him pound away, that's pretty dangerous. I think just with his physicality, a forward push with Lyerla is going to be, if you're at the 1 yard line, boy, you better beat your guy off you better beat the offensive lineman pretty good if you're a defensive lineman to stop Lyerla from at least leaning forward for the score.
Now, in terms of this bye week here, and reading your article and saying, all day today it sounds like Helfrich is going to be sitting down watching football, kind of enjoying his day off. I'm sure the athletes are doing the same, but it being this early in the year, there haven't been a ton of key injuries or anything like that. Again, it sounds like the biggest thing that's come out of this so far through 3 weeks is a stomach virus and some bad verbiage. Did the players talk about maybe, was this bye week a little too early in terms of rest? Would they have liked to have had it later on in the season? Obviously, when you're preparing for a new team, like I said, or a team with a new offense like Cal, it can help. But you've got, the heavy part of your schedule coming up where you could see some of those, that attrition and some of those injuries pile up as the season goes on and as the schedule gets tougher.
Well, that's a good point, but I also think they take this as kind of a natural transition from non-conference to conference schedule, which is what this is. It's kind of that bridge week or 2 bridge weeks in between the non-conference schedule and the conference schedule. So while I understand what you're saying, I don't think there was much, and perhaps maybe they'll feel differently later in the season if the injuries really stack up, knock on wood on that. But, if the injuries really stack up, maybe they'll say, hey, crap, I really wish we had that bye week this week rather than after week 3. But I think, right now they feel pretty good about the bye week and just kind of leading them into the conference schedule. And I don't think, the bye week obviously has tremendous benefits perhaps later in the season if there are injury problems. Obviously, Oregon, like we said, knock on wood, hasn't had those up to this point. So I think the bye week is fine right now, but maybe you won't feel that way come week 9, week 10, leading into big games with Stanford and UCLA, where you wish we could have had a week to get those guys healthy instead.
Right. Okay, well, great work out there in Eugene there, Erik, with the practice reports, and keep them coming. That's fantastic. Look forward to seeing more of the game week stuff kick in next week. They'll be back on Monday, correct?
They will be back on Monday, late practice Monday at 4 p.m., so a report will probably be up on the board around 5:30 or 6, which is a little later than usual. But yeah, rest of the week's the same. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Fridays they're kind of walk-through day, offish day, and Saturday is game day.
Excellent. All right, well, I think right there is where we're going to wrap it up. Got a good dose of recruiting, a good dose of what's going on with the team, and we'll get back with you on Wednesday to do a little Cal preview. Hopefully a little bit more recruiting news will trickle in, but it'll probably be a preview-heavy show. And remember to check us out on Twitter at Erik_Scopel and at our Boydstun eDuck. There's an underscore in there as well between my last name and eDuck. Be sure to check out eDuck, both Duck Pond and Tail Feathers, for the latest in all your football updates. Erik and I are on those boards quite a bit, as well as a lot of the Scout National guys have been chiming in big time this week with a lot of great recruiting updates. So go and check that out. And let's let Heavy Heaters take you home for the 20th edition of the eDuck podcast. I am Robby Boydstun.
Scopel out.